for a symptom.
Well, that's what Wikipedia is for.
Yeah.
That's a good source of information. Boy, I didn't bring the book.
You didn't bring one?
Didn't bring the book. That's okay.
Do you want to go get it?
Uh,
I'll keep the crowd here.
yeah.
Okay.
Let me go get it.
Dr. Colleen will return momentarily.
Oh, thank you.
He is going to get the book. I don't know any more than that.
The Bible?
Well, that's a book.
I know, I wish they just put 1, 2, 3, 4.
I assume that everybody saw the article in the newspaper this morning about, what's the spice, but they have a derivative from spice that helps with Alzheimer's. You didn't know?
Yes, oh, I read that.
Yeah, it was fascinating.
They're feeding it to rats at the moment, and I wish they'd hurry up with their rat experiments and start feeding it to me.
Well, the article had an interesting explanation that I hadn't heard before, that this is developed in a pure research firm, and to take it to the next step, you have to have a commercial firm.
Okay, if you can hear me, which I hope you can with this microphone, we're going to begin now. And the first thing, I've got 3 things on my mind today, and the first one is a book. And I went to the Lacage last Friday, and here was this book on the table, the Mayo Clinic Family Health. It's 1,400 pages. It's written in very simple English language, and it is a desirable thing for some lay person who wants to find out about their particular condition. Now, I've set up a group of books down in the reference room and the billiard room, medical books, Merck Manual, which is a similar thing to this, smaller. And then I'm going to add this. And then I have an old current therapy down there and a physician's desk reference. But if you have a problem or your doctor uses words you don't understand, this would be a good source of information for you. It's not new, it's 2003, but it's still very good. And we put it there for your convenience. Okay, first thing. Today we're going to talk about memory, and we'll begin with a very simple definition. Memory is a mental faculty by which sensations or impressions or ideas are recalled. Now, memory is not simple, and nothing neurological is simple. It's highly complex and involves multiple areas of the brain. And so what we're going to do first is discuss a little bit about anatomy. But before that, let me give you a more complex and more complete definition of memory. Memory is the store of things learned and retained from a person's activities or experiences as evidenced by modification or structure or behavior, or by recall or recognition. Now, if you go to your sheet that has the schematic drawing of the brain, we'll discuss the brain for just a little bit. The brain consists of 2 sides, 2 spheres, the right side and the left side. Both are the same. They are connected by a structure called the corpus callosum that runs across between each side. And you'll notice that the brain has lots of fissures and chasms and hills and valleys. And if the brain were flattened out, it would be a huge surface area. So there's tremendous amount of activity going on in a small space because of the way the brain is structured. Now, if you look down at the bottom, it says the spinal cord, and then above that is the brain stem. And above the brain stem is the limbic area in which short-term memory resides. And this sits at the bottom of the brain with other structures called the hippocampus, which is a seahorse-shaped structure that lies beneath the lobe of the brain, and also the amygdaloid, which is an almond-shaped structure which lies underneath there as well. As you come up, then you get to the cerebellum, and the cerebellum is a structure that has to do with posture, balance, coordination. And then the occipital lobe, which has to do primarily with vision. And then the parietal lobe, the frontal lobe, and the temporal lobe are the three structures that are really important in retrieving memory. And we'll get into that in a moment. But you must get some basic understanding of the brain structure, because you think the memory is lodged in a single area and it's lodged all over. Now turn the page over and we're going to talk about the different kinds of memory. And the first one is short-term memory. And this is quick exposure in less than 30 seconds, and without repetition or reinforcement, it's lost in 3 to 30 minutes. And things come into your head and they go out very, very rapidly. Something that goes into short-term memory has to be reinforced by attention and concentration and particularly repetition over and over and over again. Just imagine the first, second grade in school. We've got a whole bunch of kids sitting around in a circle, the teacher in the center, and around the top of the board we have the ABCs and the numbers, and the kids sit there and they sing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, day after day after day, until those letters and those numbers are ingrained within their memory. And of course, 6 and 7 years old have very immature brains. They're a long time to get them to be into maturity, which would be in the early 20s. So first term is short-term memory. We take that in and we push that into intermediate memory. And then how do we get it into long-term memory where it'll stay for a long, long time? Well, we talked about that before in the stages of sleep. We have a stage called REM sleep. REM is rapid eye movement, REM sleep. And this is a dream state which we have several times during the night. And the purpose, one of the main purposes of this REM state is to push short-term memory, intermediate-term memory into long-term memory. How can this be useful? If you take students who cram all night, and then you take students who study in the day and sleep all night, the students who sleep all night will do better than the cramming students. So each night when we sleep, we're encapsulating the experiences we've had in that day from short-term memory into long-term memory. Now, replacement memory. We can always replace things. If we find something better, something new, something more desirable, something which has more emotional appeal to us, we replace old memories with new memories. And this allows us to progress in our life from one experience to another. Now, the sensations, the sensory system, the sensations that we have are extremely important. And the most important is the visual. What you see through your eyes goes into your memory. Much stronger than the other senses. But we have acoustic, what we hear. The telephone rings, you pick up the phone, and the voice says hello, and you know that that's your daughter, your son, a neighbor, a friend, You recognize that merely from the intonation, the tone, the qualities of what you're hearing. And along with acoustic would go verbal. Spoken words are not very important unless they're heard. So you have to hear that. And we have olfactory and taste sensations. We can remember the smells of the kitchen when our mothers were cooking our favorite food, or into a favorite restaurant, and many other things as well. That's one of the things about perfumes. And the same thing goes, of course, for taste. Things you like, things you don't like. You have a very fine sense of touch with your fingers. And touch is very important even if you can't see what you're doing. One of the tests that the neurologist could do to judge a person's ability is, for a man, for example, is ask them to put their hand in their pocket and pick out a nickel or a dime, or what's the difference between a penny and a quarter. And you should be able to do this very readily without looking at it. And this is a function of touch, something that you will remember. Now, let's see. Well, we have a motor memory next. And motor memory is a procedural memory. It's something that you do over and over and over again until it becomes automatic. Walking, running, tying your shoe, playing golf if you're a golfer, tennis if you're a tennis, driving a car. We drive our car almost reflexively, hardly thinking about what we do, because we've done it so many times, it's automatic. And then I've written down topographical memory. And topographical memory prevents us from getting lost. And this is why all men are gifted with this memory, and they never get lost. Unfortunately, women do not have this gift, and they have to stop and ask for directions. Okay. As I said in the beginning, the limbic system at the brainstem is the command center for storing not only short-term memory, but also strong emotional memory. It works in conjunction with the visual cortex and the frontal lobes. The system takes programmed genetics, survival-related behavior, recent experience, and integrates all of that with bits of new information gained from daily activities with what is already in the brain database, so that we can update our concepts of how our world works in reality and how we fit into it. Now, let's go to the practical side of memory. What can you most reliably depend upon yourself to forget? What is his, her, or its name? And why is that? Why do we forget names? The reason is that the name does not mean anything to you. It refers to nothing except the person. It has no context. It doesn't belong to any category or have any meaning. It doesn't provide a clue to anything except you. Now compare names with objects in which you can have an association. For example, if I say house, your brain pictures whatever your concept is of a house, a chair, a park. Anything that triggers an association will allow you to remember much better than just a person. Now, why should we remember much easier as a young person or even at middle age? Why do we lose our memory as we gradually get older? Because we lose our ability to multitask, and it now takes longer to process new information. Do we all eventually experience the name problem? No, we don't. Not all, but almost all. Beginning in your 30s, your brain begins to shrink. And the part that shrinks the most is the frontal lobes. Your short-term memory goes into your limbic system, your long-term memory takes over, your retrieval from that memory comes from your frontal lobes. Why can't you remember? Well, you say, I think I do remember you. I've seen you before, but I don't remember your name. I can't think of the place exactly. But it's on the tip of my tongue and I'll get it out. But wait, it may come at an inopportune time, like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
And I'll call you up. We retrieve memory from our frontal lobes, and that's what shrinks the most with time. Now, Mary and I were watching a movie, and it was a Western movie, and we said to each other, who is that actor? And we didn't know, and Mary said, Denny. And I said, no, that's not right, it's Dennehy. But we couldn't remember his first name. The next morning when I woke up, I said, Brian Dennehy, in the bed. How did this happen? I don't really know how it happens, but I know it happens to all of us. There is an explanation for that, and I'll come to that in a little bit. Okay, how do we compensate for forgetting names? The answers are pretty simple. You have to have an association or a visual impression or a mnemonic or any device that you can use to help you associate the person that you're meeting with something. Then repetition. You have to space the repetitions, 20, 30 seconds apart. If you really want to remember somebody's name, you'll repeat it many times after you've met the person, but before you get to the next person. What do you do when you are with this person and you can't remember their name? The only thing you can do is say, I'm sorry, but I've forgotten your name. Would you mind telling me again? If you can accept the fact that we lose physical capacity as we get older, why can't you accept the fact that the cognitive changes will change too? And you can try to compensate for your losses in other ways. Now, what is the process of memory? The first thing is acquisition, taking in a new item of information. The second thing is filing it away. And the third thing is retrieval. And pulling it out requires paying attention and concentration. Not only does memory decline with age, but also the speed of the process declines with age. And there's a slowing of the ability to absorb new information and to elaborate upon it. And to compensate it, we must deliberately enhance attention, concentration, avoiding distractions, and then repeat it over and over again. For any skill that you want to be good at, you need to practice, practice, practice to fix anything deep in your memory. Now, older people have a lot more interference from other memories. There's a pile of memories in your head. The older you get, the more memories you have. And it takes longer to dig it out because you know so much more than you did previously. On the other hand, we were meant to forget. We were programmed to forget. And we unconsciously prioritize what we need to remember, to screen and select and filter input and make decisions on what we will remember and what we will not, and we even do it unconsciously. When Mary asks me why I don't remember things, I tell her that I don't clutter up my mind with trivial matters. And this is a great excuse for not remembering. As I said before, short-term memory comes into your brain stem, your limbic area. It's transferred into long-term memory during sleep. So we need to pay attention to paying attention. And we can't be distracted or we'll never remember what we really want to remember. Now, the next one down there is emotional memory, and emotional memory is primarily involved with the hippocampus. Procedural memory, the last one on the list, are the things we talked about that we do automatically: walking, running, getting dressed, tying our shoes, driving the car, and so forth. And these are kept in your brain independent of your hippocampus. The short-term memory center, the procedural memory, is the first in and the last out. For example, suppose you had to take a skilled piano musician and he was to develop schizophrenia and receive treatment but never recovered. He could still play the piano quite well. You don't lose everything, you only lose part. The frontal lobes begin to lose speed and volume and shrink in midlife. Memory is there, but it's slower to come out. When you stress yourself to bring out a memory, you raise your anxiety level, and that sets the brain off and actually causes the particular memory not to appear. But when the memory does come back later, well, you're not trying to bring it back at all. That's the example with the movie actor. The brain relaxes and the associations begin to flow more freely, and the name pops into your consciousness. The more the memory is used, the more it can recall, and the deeper it gets until it becomes almost automatically a reflex. Many of you here are expert in one or another things. I had great admiration for my neuroanatomy teacher in medical school. He was an older gentleman, and he knew more about the anatomy of the brain, and it was so deeply ingrained in his brain that I'm sure he was reciting things while he was asleep. And this is true for people as they become more expert in a particular activity. We take Corinne, for example. The Shakespeare is so deeply ingrained in her brain, it will never get lost. The frontal lobes of the brain in the front here are the last to develop and the first to slow down and to shrink. And they have a high metabolic demand. They require a lot of nutrients and chemicals, and it's an area where we get hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis. It slows the flow of the blood and diminishes the supply of metabolites. And that's one of the reasons why we have less or more problems with memory as we get older. Now, small dogs live longer than large dogs. And proportionally, small dogs have larger brains than large dogs. Perhaps our longer lives are a byproduct of having such big brains. The brain has a built-in bias. After eons of evolution, it remembers some things more readily than others. It dwells on what is essential to survival and tends to disregard trivia after a single pass. What is significant and important has the best chance of being stored and retrieved. We cling to the meaningful experiences so as to anticipate what we will do if the experience is repeated. We hold on to our experiences to extract from them information to simulate possibilities before they occur. We are now able to plan for the future because we can remember the past. Now I have two more little things. Where did I put my wallet? I lost my wallet. You don't know where your wallet is, but you know how to read, you know how to drive your car, you know how to spend or save or worry about whatever is or is not in your wallet that you cannot find. That's a common thing, is misplacing something. Another misplacement. I can't remember where I left my keys. That progresses to who moved my keys. And finally, why did you take my keys? I can't remember where I left my keys refers to me. Who moved my keys refers to somebody outside of me. Why did you take my keys? That's a paranoid ideation and demonstrates an escape from reality and means trouble for the person and for the family. So remember where you left your keys. All right, now, any questions or comments about memory?
Isn't, if you try and put your keys down in the same place all the time, or you try to put your wallet in the same place every time, doesn't that help?
Of course it helps. Of course it helps. That's why we get into routines. We try to stick to our routines. And that's a very good thing. Another thing is marking everything down on the calendar. You know, every event, every place you want to go, every appointment you have, write it down someplace where you can find it. Claudia?
What about the dreams? I came thinking you were going to talk about dreams.
Well, I've talked about dreams before. Dreams are work in your brain while you're sleeping in the REM state, rapid eye movement state. If you put an electrocephalograph wires on your head, you see certain waves that appear during your sleep, and there's different stages of sleep. There's mild sleep, deeper sleep, deep sleep, REM states, and you're doing this all night long, up and down. And in this REM state, your brain is taking your short-term memories and inserting them into the long-term memories, scattered throughout your head, primarily in the frontal lobes. And this is how you take memory and make it something that you can retrieve rapidly, quickly. The deeper you get it in, the easier it is to come out. But it all occurs during the night. And as we get older, we have much less REM sleep. Remember I told you that an infant will sleep 12 to 18 hours a day, and they have maybe 8, 10 hours of REM sleep. It's shorter and shorter and shorter. In older people like us, we have short periods of REM sleep and not as many of them as we did when we were younger. And that's how the system is thought to work. Well, that's how the system, yeah, it's thought to work in 2011, 5 years from now. Yeah.
I'll tell you something about procedural memory. I remember times when I was at work, I'd get in the car, and I'd drive home half an hour, and I wouldn't remember stopping for a red light, going through the Sepulveda Tunnel, or anything. Now, is that the procedural memory?
That's the procedural memory. That's almost reflex. We drive so much that we almost do it without thinking. It's not good not to think, but it's the way it is. The same thing about when you ride your bicycle. You're not thinking about riding your bicycle. You're riding the bicycle because you've done it for 1,000 times, and it's automatic to you. And it's we do that from the time we get up to the time we go to bed. Very, very, very common thing.
Did you mention that dreaming is only at night?
Yeah, dreaming is only at night.
I can fall asleep in the daytime dreaming.
Oh, sure. It's the same sleep cycle,
Okay.
whether you sleep at night or day.
And then I wake up and I don't know if I'm going to sleep or not.
What about all those people who work all night
Well,
and they have to sleep all day?
just sleep.
It is the most common thing is that you don't remember your dreams. Some people do remember their dreams, but most people do not. In the laboratory, when they see that you're in this REM state of dream, they'll wake you up and say, "What are you dreaming about?" And that's how they study this in sleep laboratory. Because they can tell when you're dreaming just by looking at your EEG.